President's visit was met by the president's visit to El Paso, that is, was met with a number of people and state leaders, including the governor and Senator Ted Cruz.
He's currently at a hospital meeting with medical professionals and victims from Saturday's mass shooting there. It claimed the lives of 22 people.
President Donald Trump's visit to Dayton was met with applause and protests.
Supporters met him with signs and flags, while protesters flew the notorious Trump baby blimp. And during his Ohio visit, the president also met with victims and first responders at a local hospital.
NBC4's Ted Hart is live in Dayton with more on the president's visit. Ted?
Yeah, and the president's motorcade never did come down this street in Dayton where the shootings took place and where the makeshift memorial continues to grow. His visit to Dayton today was private, away from the cameras and away from the protests. Protesters lined the street outside the hospital where the president and first lady met with some of the injured from Sunday's mass shooting.
I'm not talking to nobody.
And in the Oregon district where the shootings took place, protesters and supporters of the president debated issues of racism, immigration, and gun control.
It's a crisis in this country, and we can't say it's one thing or another. We have to say it's all things.
Trump's stoking the hatred, my opinion.
So do you blame him for what's happening?
Yes, very directly I do.
Many of those protesting want the president to support a ban on assault-style weapons.
You know, I support the Second Amendment, but not these military assault weapons and high-capacity magazines.
But Trump supporter Chris Conley says banning weapons is not the answer.
I don't agree with any of that, so I'm a Trump supporter all the way.
The president has said he would support so-called red flag laws to allow courts to intervene and prevent access to guns when someone is judged to be a grave risk to public safety. Governor Mike DeWine heard from Dayton residents this week when they started shouting, "Do something," during a vigil for the victims. Republican State Senator Peggy Lehner says state lawmakers clearly heard that message as well.
I think we're going to be hearing a lot of that chant, "Do something," wherever we go, whichever party we are in. And frankly, we deserve it. We've done nothing.
And Governor DeWine has now given the General Assembly a series of proposals, including mental health funding and red flag laws and background checks. And so now the pressure will be on state lawmakers to do something. Local for you and live in Dayton, Ted Hart, NBC4.
All right, Ted, thank you. As he mentioned, in the wake of these shootings, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine has laid out a 17-point proposal to help curb gun violence in the state of Ohio. Many of those items dealt with increasing penalties for felons who possess a gun illegally or use a gun in a crime. Some dealt with addressing mental health, like asking state lawmakers to deal with how psychiatric hospitals are used by the courts. He also brought up a proposal similar to a red flag law, stopping short, though, of calling it a red flag law, something Ohioans may have heard before. NBC4's Eric Halperin is live with a closer look at these so-called red flag laws. Eric?
Mark, essentially the purpose behind red flag laws are to keep guns out of the hands of people who may be a danger to themselves or others. If a family member, friend, or police officer is worried about someone they know owning a gun, they can ask for the weapon to be confiscated. A judge can then order the gun be temporarily taken away if they determine the person is a danger to themselves or others. Governor Kasich made a similar proposal. Governor DeWine says his was crafted with a focus on due process. It includes having a hearing within 3 days of the person in question being notified. A judge at that hearing then determines if the gun should be taken away. The proposal also calls for another hearing within 2 weeks to see if the order should be extended. Both Second Amendment advocates and gun control advocates say they support safety protection orders as long as all voices are heard.
We need to be brought in a part of that. People in our industry need to be brought into that. Mental health experts need to be brought into that. If the right people are making that decision, then we'll be supportive of what that is.
Any kind of measure that can keep guns out of the hands of someone who's a danger to themselves or others, we do support. Again, we would need to look at the details and would love to have a seat at the table at that conversation with the governor and with the state legislators.
And right now, more than a dozen other states have some sort of red flag law. Live and local for you at the State House, I'm Eric Halperin, NBC4.
He was a bit dark. He was odd. He had a strange sense of humor that was kind of gory and dark, and some would call it evil.
While law enforcement continues to work to try to figure out the Dayton shooter's motive, an ex-girlfriend says there were warning signs leading up to the tragedy. Lindsay Dahl dated him for less than a year when they were in high school, and she remembers when she first met him. Many women came up to her warning her of his violent tendencies. Dahl says she did tell people about his dark thoughts, but people didn't take any action.
Everyone kind of swept it under the rug. Police swept all of his issues under the rug. Any teachers may have swept it under the rug. I feel more attention should have been paid to his actions. He should have been held more accountable for them.
NBC News did reach out to the shooter's former school, but so far they've heard nothing back.
Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown was also in Dayton today. During a joint press conference with Dayton Mayor Nan Whaley, Brown said he spent time with the president calling for action on gun control, specifically calling on the president to call senators back into session to vote now. But Sherrod Brown says the Republican Party is, quote, in bed with the gun lobby.
Both the mayor and I asked the president to call on Senator McConnell to bring the Senate back in session this week, to tell the Senate that he wants the background checks bill that has already passed the House, that he wants it on the floor. I asked the president to promise to me and to the American people that he will sign that bill after he's spoken out in support of it with Senator McConnell.
Now, President Trump did not take kindly to that press conference, tweeting out tonight that it was, quote, a fraud that bore no resemblance to what took place while he was in Dayton. NBC4 reached out to Sherrod Brown's office, who sent us a statement reading in response, I've said before, Donald Trump is a bully and bullies are cowards. I don't care what he says about me, but the people of Dayton deserve a president more focused on protecting them from gun violence than protecting his own ego.